Greetings and welcome to Calabash Community Talk with me, Ramotse Jonathan. This is part of the Calabash Media Network. We continue to bring you the news Saruna from the community Saruna, from the different publications that we run. We have Midlands News Calabash, which is one of the publications that are sponsoring this discussion Saruna. We also have Greater Dobsonville News Calabash, which is part of the Calabash Media Network, as well as Soweto Business Calabash, which is something we continue to profile the communities around us. Today is Thursday. That means we're talking business effectiveness, we're talking labor issues, as well as consumer issues. Our topic for today is workplace discipline. And to help us discuss this issue, we have Kwazi Dlamini. Kwazi, welcome to Calabash Community Talk.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. I guess let's start here for the benefit of our viewers. Who is Kwazi Dlamini?
So my name is Kwazi Dlamini. I am from the company called Nell Mondi Consultancy, and at NMC we assist business owners to operationalize their business strategy from a human resources perspective. And we also do that by removing performance-hindering inefficiencies by means of training, coaching, and also restructuring in order to create performance-enhancing environment that is aligned to the actual strategy and ultimately geared at making businesses profitable. So that's Kwazi coming from Nell Mondi Consultancy, which is a labor consulting firm.
Let's go straight into today's topic. What is workplace discipline and how should the employers treat this issue?
Okay. So just to understand what workplace discipline is, workplace discipline is simply the absence of disorder and disharmony in the workplace. It is not fundamentally different from other forms of discipline in that it is aimed at ensuring compliance with rules so that there is no disorder. So if you consider, for instance, people want to ensure that they have order in the home, by setting up rules in place that everyone has to follow. That's what workplace discipline is as well, in that it's simply to ensure that in that particular workplace, there is order. Of course, that order coming from the rules of the employer.
Mm-hmm. So yes. The employer is responsible for ensuring that there is discipline at the workplace.
That is correct. Yes, you are correct there, Jonathan.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
What are some of the measures what are the measures that the employer can take when they want to enforce discipline at the workplace?
So it always depends, and I'll come back to the rules that we have in the workplace. So those rules are actually contained in what is called a disciplinary code and procedure. So that particular document outlines those rules to say, for this particular offense, this is a guide in terms of how you start disciplining the employees in the workplace. So just to give an example, there are different types of offenses, and we refer to those offenses as misconduct. So we discipline employees because they have committed a misconduct in the workplace. They've contravened a rule of the employer. Therefore, that particular offense or misconduct, there will be a guidance in terms of what type of a sanction is to be applied for a particular misconduct. And just so I can paint a better picture in saying that, if you consider an employee who is late for work, reporting late for duty is a misconduct. You find that for that kind of an offense, Jonathan, we are able to apply what is called corrective discipline. So those measures then apply to say, let's start with a verbal warning, because we are correcting the behavior. We want the employee to not be late again, to refrain from reporting for duty late. And then we've got other offenses that we refer to as gross misconduct, for instance, if you consider theft. Now, theft is not the same as reporting for duty under the influence. As reporting late for duty. So you find that the penalty for theft is much more harsher than a penalty for reporting for duty late. You get what I mean? So the disciplinary code will always guide you in terms of what kind of measures do we need to implement to correct the behavior of the employee. But we also note that there are different types of offenses, and those offenses may attract different sanctions. Yeah.
Something comes to my mind, remembering where I used to be employed at some stage in my life.
Yes.
The employers can still use the disciplinary code to abuse the staff. Their employees. So in these cases like this, how do we deal with it?
So in that case, one of the things that employees must be aware of, very important, when rules are applied in the workplace, they need to be applied consistently throughout the organization. Meaning what's good for A must be good for B, especially when the merits of the case are similar and there is no reason to deviate from the disciplinary code. Remember, when an employee is being disciplined for misconduct, we must have been, as an employer has to establish that the rule has actually been broken. Meaning, you cannot discipline an employee for a rule they didn't break. That's where it starts. So, did the employee, firstly, is the employee aware of the rule? That's what we are required by law to look at. To say, number one, is the employee aware of the rule? Or could we reasonably expect the employee to have been aware of the rule? And then, is the rule applied consistently in the organization? And number four, did the employee contravene the rule? So if you can answer as an employer all those four questions, it tells you whether or not you have grounds to discipline an employee. Though I'll mention just a bit in terms of what an employee can do based on what you asked, there should be a process called the grievance. Though my thinking is we are not talking about that today, but just to touch a little bit on it. So maybe let me sum it up this way. An employer has a recourse of discipline when an employee has broken the rule. The employee also has an option of a grievance, lodging a grievance for any unfairness that they are seeing or experiencing. And equally, the employer has a duty to look into that grievance. So the disciplinary code and the grievance procedure allow both parties to find a way to raise issues. The employer, of course, on the side of the rule being broken, but the employee also saying, but I'm not being fairly treated here. And I want to voice out my grievances. So that's what employees can do.
We'll get to the grievances in other episodes when we talk about the grievances. But what I want to understand is, at the end of the day, someone who's employed by me, Jonathan, working for me, and I'm using the disciplinary code to abuse them, if I can put it that way. In most cases, they become afraid of launching their grievances because they say, hey, at the end of the day, so I end up doing things I'm not supposed to do. But let's go into this. What is the role of the employee when it comes to discipline at the workplace?
So the employee, one, is there to learn and know about the rules of the employer, and ultimately to refrain from committing any misconduct. That's what the employee is there to do in terms of complying with the rules of the employer. Yes.
So in this case, we know we have things like the workplace forum, we have things like your unions. How are they ensuring that? What should be their role in ensuring that their members they also follow the discipline that is they are on a discipline that is needed at their workplace?
So what happens is, so when it comes to unions, so we normally try to discuss things with employees as early as possible. But in terms of what the unions do, so the unions normally deal with their members through shop stewards. So shop stewards are they should be trained, of course, in terms of their role in the workplace. And of course, in the event that an employee has committed a misconduct in the workplace, they can be represented by their shop steward to defend them when they are being disciplined. So that's where our shop stewards come in terms of assisting employees during or during disciplinary discussions or disciplinary inquiries that may take place in the workplace. Yes.
What is the role of a discipline or a discipline at the workplace when it comes to brand, the brand image of the company or a business?
Very important, Jonathan. Very important question. So, when you are an employee of a particular organization, you have a duty, especially when you conduct yourself during the scope of your employment, to constantly be aware that you are representing the employer. This means, whenever you engage with the clients of the employer, you are there as a you are there as a representative of the employer to the client. So how you conduct yourselves, how an employee conducts themselves, it's very important because they are the image of the company. Therefore, if there's any misconduct that one does that possibly places the company at disrepute, that is actually a gross misconduct. So that's very important because now it touches on the client and the company relationship that exists. There could be instances where a company can lose a client as a result of what the employee possibly maybe does in their engagement with a client. So it's very important to bear in mind not putting the company or the employer in disrepute when you conduct yourself in that way or during the scope of your employment, rather. Very important.
Yes. Then we have Jonathan, who is the naughty boy at the company. Everyone knows, or Jonathan, this one is the naughty boy of the company, and the company is not doing anything to make him toe the line, or is it because maybe because this guy has been there from day one when the company was starting, so the employers feel we have this loyalty towards him. But what is the effects that his behavior in the company towards his colleagues who are saying this one, even if you can do whatever you want, he's not going to be disciplined the same way as the others?
And I would blame the employer for that. And it comes back to what we spoke about in terms of consistency in applying discipline in the workplace. We must clearly establish, companies must clearly establish those rules, must ensure that rules are applied consistently in the organization, whether I'm 2 months into the job or I'm 15 years into the job. If I am contravening the rule of the employer, I must be disciplined, irrespective of how many years I've been with the company. So, and if one employee is disciplined for a similar offense that this employee that you are talking about is not disciplined for, then one, we are not complying with Schedule 8 of the Code of Good Practice, in that it clearly states that in order to ensure that there is fairness in disciplining employees, there must be consistency in applying the rule of the employer. Because in the event that I'm disciplined and ultimately dismissed for an offense that I know this particular individual was never disciplined for and they've committed the same offense, I can always raise it as a defense in the inquiry, or if unfortunately I am dismissed, I can always raise it through perhaps the CCMA, for instance, and say, my employer, I am aware of this employee who did this. They were never disciplined, but I am here. I've been dismissed. Why was I disciplined? Why was I dismissed for the same thing that somebody else did? So when employers don't consistently apply their own rules, it will come back to them in that way, just based on consistency.
Also, maybe se o ithekisetsa go spaza sa gage hana nako ya gore o etsa the contract and do ya through these papers, but how important is it that the small businesses themselves should have the code, the disciplinary code ga ba rana di business tsa bone?
Yes. So normally they don't. I always though say, I call it we've got inductions. When you induct a new employee who's coming in, communicate those rules with your employee, and discipline employees in those small spaza shops to say this kind of conduct is not acceptable. Don't do it again. So it's very important, whether you are doing it verbally, you must ensure that you correct the behavior of the employee. Of the employee when they've committed a misconduct, irrespective of how big the company or small the company is. It's important to ensure that you instill and you communicate discipline in the workplace in terms of what behavior is acceptable and what is not acceptable. That is important. Yeah.
So, something comes to my mind back then when I was still at school. At some point, being an LRC, our school, we were called, and the school governing body said, "We want you to be part of the drafting, the school code of conduct." How important is it to include your staff when you draft this disciplinary code?
So normally, employees are normally not involved in the actual drafting of the disciplinary code, because the employer is there to ensure that that is in place. And if employees are finding then an issue in relation to that particular disciplinary code, the employer can come together with the employee and engage on those things to say, why does this exist? Or we are not comfortable with this, or raise whatever concerns they have with certain parts of that disciplinary code. But most of the time it is the employer that brings the disciplinary code to the employees to say, this is how we behave in this organization. So employees are normally not involved in terms of the drafting of the disciplinary code. It normally comes from the employer giving it to the employees.
Can the employer still go beyond what the schedule is saying when it comes to discipline at work?
So in terms of that, as long as our disciplinary code is always within what is required by legislation. So we cannot have rules in the workplace that contradict what the legislation says. Yes. So we get our guide from what the legislation says, and then we then use that legislation to tailor-make our own rules and regulations, because they always have to be in line, for instance, with the Labor Relations Act.
Then let's remind our listeners and viewers, what are those corrective measures that we will take when we enter one so that they understand? When you go to companies, they will say you have a counseling that you will have to go through it, and then come all those your first warning, second warning, and the way the latelanangas. And let's try to make them, because we take it for granted that people know, and the people don't know exactly how these things work.
Yes. So firstly, I would just urge the listeners or the viewers to ensure that wherever they work, they must just take a look at that disciplinary code. If they haven't seen it, they need to ask for it. because it will tell them everything that they need to know.
When you ask
So
for it, Barolo comrade.
And it's not supposed to be that way, Jonathan. It really isn't, because it's a document that belongs to me. I'm an employee of the company. So therefore, I need to know how I ought to conduct myself in this organization. Because, there may be issues in that, was I aware of the rule? And, if I say, no, I wasn't aware of the rule, I've never seen the disciplinary code, that will be an issue for the employer. So it is in the best interest of the employer to actually share that document with all employees. But coming back to the point in terms of the various warnings and all of that. So that talks about progressive discipline, as I slightly mentioned earlier. So each type of misconduct will guide us in terms of what is it that we do in terms of applying the rule in the workplace. We also note that each case is dealt with on its own merits. Now, we have employee A, like I said, who reported for duty under the influence of alcohol. For the who reported late for duty. Now, when that employee then comes late, of course, the employer has to engage as to what happened, because it's important, Jonathan, to establish the why. What happened? Why? Now, this employee is late. No, I was late, or whatever the case may be. I woke up late, and then we say, all right, to correct the behavior, I'm issuing you with a verbal warning. A verbal warning is normally valid for about 3 months. And then you find that the employee A repeats the same offense again, within this 3 months period, while the verbal warning is still valid. Then what do? We go to the next step, which is a written warning. Normally, a written warning is valid for 6 months. So the higher we go in disciplining, the more harsher the warnings are, especially in terms of the period, the validity period. So then now we are sitting with this employee who was reporting late for duty the second time. Now they've got a written warning that's valid for 6 months, right? And then within the 6 months, the employee repeats the same offense again, is late for work. While the 6 months is still valid, then we go to what is called a final written warning. Now, a final written warning, Jonathan, is the last opportunity for the employee to correct their behavior.
To correct themselves.
Yes. And it differs with companies. Some companies have final written warnings that are valid for a period of 9 months. Other companies have final written warnings that are valid for a period of 12 months. Meaning, if you commit the same offense within this 12-month period, the next step is dismissal. So that's the concept of corrective discipline in the workplace. And then we have, serious misconduct such as theft, such as fraud or sexual harassment or anything like that. And those then don't warrant us to progressively correct the behavior.
Correct this, yeah.
Yes, you can't correct theft because the trust relationship between the employer and the employee has broken irreparably. So even if the employee commits that offense for the very first time, they're likely to be dismissed. So employees, or rather our fellow viewers, need to go and look at what the company disciplinary code states where they work, so that they can see what happens if I commit this offense, if I commit that offense. What does the guide say in terms of what sanctions could be imposed on me? So it's very important, Jonathan, that the viewers familiarize themselves with the disciplinary code and procedure.
Let's go back to the issue theft and others.
Yes.
If I steal a television set at my workplace, is it still the same as I steal the teaspoon at my workplace? How do we differentiate them? Or is still theft, so you have to leave?
So it is, of course, yes. So the employer will, of course, state their case in terms of what they deem is as broken trust irreparably. Because when trust has been broken irreparably, it makes the employment relationship untenable. We can't go on. But if the employer is the one that says, for instance, let's say for the TV set, the employer says the trust relationship has been broken irreparably, meaning we cannot go on. This relationship cannot continue beyond this point. And then there is no other way except dismissal. And then you find that it's an issue of a teaspoon. Then maybe the employer says that the relationship is broken, but can still be repaired. You find that in that case, then the chairperson who presides over that matter will then maybe say, you know what, because it is the employer who is saying, yes, the trust is broken, but it can be repaired. We can mend it. I can still work with this person. It makes a difference. And that's when a chairperson may deviate from the disciplinary code when it comes to theft and say, based on that reason, I can then issue a final written warning as opposed to a dismissal. Maybe the final written warning can be coupled with unpaid suspension or anything like that. But it might just be a sanction that is short of dismissal. So that's what it can be. But it will depend on what the employer says in their aggravating factors to the chairperson on that.
Kwazi, what have we left behind when it comes to issue discipline, this workplace discipline?
So in terms of what we've left behind, I think for me, more than anything, it's important that the employer ensures that employees are aware of the rule. When I'm starting in a new company, I have to know. And sometimes I've seen some companies for not seeing that very seriously or not taking it seriously. It's very important that we communicate the rules of the employer, as we are required to do so by law, actually. We have to ensure that the employee is aware of the rule. Number two, we need to ensure that when we communicate the disciplinary code, we ensure that employees understand that we are not just out to dismiss. We are not out to get rid of employees because it's not a win for the employer, right? So when we ensure that discipline is communicated in the workplace in terms of its rules, when we ensure that we correct the behavior of employees whenever they contravene, the rules of the employer. Mistakes do happen, Jonathan, and some mistakes can be corrected. And the employer should try by all means, where possible, to correct the behavior so that we improve the relations between the employer and employee. And very importantly, to also have employees comply with those rules, as you would want your own children in your own house, for instance, or any visitors, to comply with the rules of your household. The same is expected in an employment relationship. And very importantly, employers must consistently apply the rule in the workplace to ensure that it is fair, because it causes disharmony in the workplace when we see others getting away with things that some of us are being disciplined for. So it's very important to ensure that there is fairness when it comes to discipline in the workplace. Because if I commit this offense and I'm disciplined and someone else commits the same offense and they are disciplined, then it's clear to all of us that that is unacceptable behavior. And if I commit it also, it will result in the same thing that happened to the others who were disciplined. So that's very important, Jonathan. So I think that's how I can sum it up for you.
What are we discussing in the next episode?
So in the next episode, just to be sure, I must just check.
Yeah, okay, we will communicate, we'll promote it. Our viewers and listeners will know what are we discussing, but we will still be alongside the issues of discipline and other
Of
things
course.
ra di discuss. Let's finalize here so that the people can understand. In most cases, when we say employer, people think you are an employer when you have more than 10 people. Just for
Not
clarity,
the
everyone who pays someone's salary at the end of the day is an employer.
correct. I couldn't have put it better myself. Correct.
How do we get hold of you if someone wants to get in touch with Nell Mondi Consultancy?
All right. They can. Yes. Oh, thank you, Jonathan. I am actually contactable on my cell phone, which is 079 598 2973. At the moment, we are just slightly busy with our emails. So I will be sharing my NMC email address probably in our next show, because at the moment that is still being worked on. But I should be communicating. Yes.
Kwazi, looking forward to the next discussion. This was a very informative discussion between us, and I hope people, our listeners and viewers, they will take advice from what you are advices that you are giving to them. And this show was made possible by Calabash Media Network and all its publications, that is Midlands News Calabash, Greater Dobsonville News Calabash, Soweto Business Calabash, in partnership with Nell Mondi Consultancy. Kwazi, ke go lebogile till we meet again for episode ya rona e latelang.
Yes. Thank you so much, Jonathan. Thank you. Take care then.
Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching. Please share your comment and like this video. Help us grow our community by pressing the subscribe button and grow with us.